Ебать! Ебать!
In the early hours before dawn, when Moscow usually breathes in a rhythm shaped by routine and habit, a shock rippled through the city that few could have imagined only months ago. The Russian capital, long portrayed as untouchable, woke to the echo of alarms, the glow of fires on the horizon, and a sudden, unsettling realization that the war, once framed as distant, had reached the symbolic heart of the country. What followed was not only a physical strike, but a psychological one, challenging assumptions, narratives, and the very idea of security that had surrounded the Kremlin for decades. For years, Moscow had been presented as the ultimate fortress, protected by layers of air defense, intelligence networks, and strategic depth. The war in Ukraine, though devastating and intense, was largely depicted to the Russian public as something happening far away, in border regions or contested territories, not in the streets and skies above their own capital. That illusion shattered in a single moment. Explosions, whether intercepted or not, carried a message louder than any official statement. The conflict was no longer confined to the periphery. The surprise strike, attributed to Ukrainian forces using a combination of drones, intelligence coordination, and timing, was not merely about physical damage. Even limited destruction in a city like Moscow has outsized consequences. It questions competence, exposes vulnerabilities, and forces leaders to confront uncomfortable truths. In a political system built heavily on the projection of strength and control, the symbolism of flames visible near the capital resonates far beyond the immediate tactical outcome. As images circulated on social media, some verified, others exaggerated, the atmosphere inside Russia shifted. People who had followed the war through carefully curated television broadcasts suddenly experienced it firsthand. Traffic slowed as residents checked their phones. Conversations in kitchens and workplaces grew quieter, more serious. Fear mixed with confusion, and confusion with anger. The strike created a crack in the narrative wall that had separated us from them, here from there. At the center of this storm stood Vladimir Putin, a leader whose authority has long been intertwined with the promise of stability and strength. For years, Putin cultivated an image of Russia as a resurgent power, capable of asserting itself abroad while keeping order at home. The attack on Moscow challenged that image directly. It raised a question that is dangerous for any authoritarian system. If the capital can be struck, what else is vulnerable? Reports and rumors quickly spread that Putin was considering a shift in tone, even floating ideas that sounded dangerously close to giving up, or at least redefining victory. In the language of politics, such phrases are rarely literal. They often signal a recalibration, a search for an exit that can be framed as strategic rather than defeat. Yet even the perception that the Kremlin might be thinking along these lines sent shockwaves through both supporters and critics. Inside the Russian elite, the strike intensified existing tensions. Hardliners argued that the attack proved the need for harsher measures, broader mobilization, and uncompromising retaliation. Pragmatists, however, saw a warning sign. They recognized that escalation carries risks, especially when the enemy demonstrates the ability to reach deep into Russian territory. For them, the flames near Moscow were not just a provocation, but a signal that the cost of continuing the war might soon outweigh the benefits. Ukraine, on the other hand, framed the strike as a demonstration of resilience and capability. After years of enduring missile barrages, infrastructure destruction, and civilian casualties, Kiev sought to show that Russia's overwhelming size and resources did not guarantee immunity. The message was clear. If Ukrainian cities could burn, so could Russian ones. This was not about terrorizing civilians, Ukrainian officials emphasized, but about altering the strategic balance and forcing Moscow to reconsider its assumptions. Internationally, the reaction was swift and complex.
Western capitals watched closely, balancing public caution with private analysis. On one hand, the strike underscored Ukraine's growing sophistication and the effectiveness of support provided by its allies. On the other, it raised fears of escalation. Moscow, under pressure, can behave unpredictably, and any attack on the capital carries the risk of provoking a disproportionate response. China, India, and other countries that have tried to maintain a careful distance from the conflict took note as well. Stability, especially in a nuclear-armed state, is a global concern. The idea that Moscow itself could become a battleground, even in limited ways, introduced new variables into diplomatic calculations. Calls for restraint grew louder, even as the underlying causes of the war remained unresolved. Within Russia, state media moved quickly to control the narrative. Initial reports downplayed the impact, emphasizing successful interceptions and minimal damage. Footage of calm streets and officials assuring safety filled the airwaves. Yet, in the age of smartphones and independent channels, complete control is impossible. Videos shot from balconies, shaky recordings of smoke plumes, and first-hand accounts circulated faster than censorship could suppress them. Each clip chipped away at the official version of events. The psychological impact of the strike may ultimately prove more significant than the physical one. Wars are fought not only with weapons, but with perceptions. For Ukrainian citizens, seeing the conflict touch Moscow offered a grim sense of balance, a reminder that their suffering was no longer invisible or one-sided. For Russians, it shattered the comfort of distance and forced a confrontation with the reality of a war conducted in their name. As days passed, analysts debated whether the strike marked a turning point or merely a dramatic episode in a long and grinding conflict. Some argued that it would push Putin towards negotiation, providing political cover to de-escalate without appearing weak. Others believed it would harden positions, leading to intensified strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure and renewed efforts to assert dominance. The notion that Putin might be ready to give up became a focal point of speculation. In reality, leaders rarely surrender outright. What they do instead is redefine objectives, shift rhetoric, and seek compromises that can be sold domestically as strategic successes. The challenge for the Kremlin is finding such a narrative after a strike on Moscow. Any agreement that appears to concede too much risks backlash from nationalists and hardliners who see the war as existential. At the same time, the Russian public's tolerance for prolonged conflict is not infinite. Economic pressures, international isolation, and now the creeping sense of insecurity at home weigh heavily. While overt dissent remains risky, private frustration grows. History shows that wars often end not when armies are defeated outright, but when societies lose faith in the purpose and cost of continued fighting. For Ukraine, the strike reinforced a strategy focused on asymmetric pressure. Unable to match Russia tank to tank or missile to missile, Ukraine has relied on precision, intelligence, and symbolism. Hitting Moscow was as much about sending a message as achieving a tactical gain. It told both Russians and the world that Ukraine is not merely surviving, but adapting, learning, and pushing back in unexpected ways. The future trajectory of the conflict remains uncertain. One possibility is a gradual move towards negotiations driven by fatigue and fear of escalation. Another is a dangerous spiral, where each side seeks to reassert dominance through ever bolder actions. The strike on Moscow sits at the crossroads of these paths, a moment that could either open the door to de-escalation or slam it shut. What is clear is that the war has entered a new phase. The geographic and psychological boundaries that once defined it have blurred. Moscow, once the distant command center, has become part of the battlefield's mental map. This shift changes calculations on all sides, from generals planning air defenses to diplomats weighing sanctions and ceasefires. In the end, the flames seen in Moscow are not just about a single strike or a single night. They symbolize the fragility of assumptions that underpin modern warfare and modern politics. They remind us that no capital, no matter how powerful, is entirely beyond reach in an age of drones, information warfare, and globalized conflict. They force leaders and citizens alike to confront uncomfortable questions about responsibility, resilience, and the true cost of war. As the smoke clears and the narratives harden, one truth remains unavoidable. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is no longer a story of distant fronts and abstract maps. It is a living, evolving reality that touches cities, symbols, and psyches on both sides. Whether this moment leads to reflection and restraint or deeper confrontation will shape the future not only of these two nations, but the stability of an already fragile world.